case here, Norman Gerras, is an academic who felt so moved by anger at what was happening and the dominance of the wrong sorts of voices in the public conversation that he used his own blog as a way of attempting to show that there were opinions out there on the left which were completely contrary and true to the proper liberal secular traditions of the left. And what's striking as well is that support for the Euston Manifesto developed in what was called the blogosphere. And through the creation of new media and new media activity, we actually saw that the view that we get through the mainstream broadcast media, Channel 4 News, Today and Newsnight, not only didn't represent mainstream British opinion, it didn't even represent mainstream moderate left-wing British opinion. One of the things that the Euston Manifesto has also been very useful in doing is helping to provide a platform for those members of the British Labour Party who wanted to take on, in some cases, some of their own members, in making the case for liberal values against Islamism, and in some cases for liberal intervention. And it's striking that Labour MPs as various as Gisela Stewart, Greg Pope and John Mann have all signed the Euston Manifesto. I suspect that many more Labour MPs would be signatories if some of them weren't actually currently government ministers. But who knows, maybe in June or July, there may be some individuals who may be free enough to sign the Euston Manifesto. Talking of June or July, however, one of the things that I do want to acknowledge is that in the past month or so, Gordon Brown, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, has been spreading his wings as a political figure and attempting to outline his vision for the sort of Britain that he wants to lead beyond the rather dry technical economic vision that he's outlined so far. And one of the things that he's talked about is the importance of doing battle culturally and intellectually with Islamism, with that ideology. And he's prayed in aid the example of the reaction of intellectuals to communism during the Cold War. And I think that in terms of his analysis, he's absolutely right. But one of the things that I would point out to Gordon is that, in a way, this cultural battle is already being joined by people like Amos, McEwen and Rushdie, Lloyd, Aronovich and Cohen. And the argument that I would put to the government and to other politicians is, why is it that these voices, distinguished and impeccably on the left, are still seen as the marginal voices? Why aren't they championed, quoted, prayed in aid and lauded? More than that, there's a particular challenge that any future government should face. I talked about an anti-Islamist intelligentsia in Britain and in the United States, but the most important place where there's an anti-Islamist intelligentsia is in the Middle East and the broader Islamic world as well. If one looks at the example of people like Shirin Ebadi, if one looks at the example of Iranian journalists and academics who've been jailed for daring to speak out against the Islamist regime in Iran, one of the questions that I would ask is, when was the last time that any British politician or foreign minister raised their names and their plights in the way in which during the 1980s we regularly used to invoke the name and raise the plight of people like Natan Sharansky and Václav Havel? Why is it that no British minister has done anything like what Malcolm Rivkins did in the 1980s when he deliberately asked to see the grave of Father Jerzy Popescu and laid a wreath on that grave, and in so doing morally shamed the communist government of Poland for its actions? Why is it that we haven't seen any British minister or politician challenge the Egyptian government to ask what it's been doing when it's attempted to silence voices of liberalism in that country? There are a number of figures, many of them quoted in this superb book, The Long War for Freedom, by Barry Rubin, The Arab Struggle for Democracy in the Middle East. There are many figures, Suleiman al-Hassan, Mansour al-Noghedan, and of course people who we know perhaps better, Fuad Ajami, Canon Mikia, whose names should be regularly invoked by our politicians and whose brave struggle against Islamism should be our struggle as well. Two final figures that I'll mention. I can't imagine that there's anyone in this room, though with Douglas Murray in this room I may be wrong, who's heard of Shakar al-Nabulsi and Al-Afif al-Akhdar. These are two Arab figures who were responsible in 2004 for issuing a manifesto on a website, Middle East Transparent, in which they denounced the actions of terrorists in the name of Islam and called for a fatwa to be placed on all those clerics who attempted to justify terrorist violence with reference to Islamic texts. Their open manifesto attracted the signature of 300 writers and intellectuals and politicians across the Arab world and the Arab and Islamic diaspora. But we have heard nothing about that effort from any Western politician. The position, I know, of liberals in Arab and Islamist countries is pretty bleak. But it's all the bleaker when those in this country who have the power to speak, a power which is often denied those in Arab and Islamic countries, don't raise their voices and use their intellectual weight to cry freedom. Thank you very much.